Shabbat Shalom. This week it is Parshat Vayera, which is a moment where Abraham and Sarah are settled, and they are in their tent, and then Abraham looks up and there are strangers. 3 men appearing out of nowhere. Our tradition says they are malachim, that they are angels. And last week's portion was kind of the opposite. It was that moment of Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladacha mibeit avicha. Avram and Sarai get up from that place that you know, from all that is familiar, from the place where you are comfortable and know what's going on, and head out into the world to be able to find a new way of moving through the world. There are incredible bookends to see them, because you have Avram and Sarai heading out into the world, and then we are seeing Abraham and Sarah who are settled in that place, and then they're doing the act of welcoming. Lots of hachnasat orchim, lots of hospitality in this week's Torah, in the last week's Torah portion, in this week's Torah portion. You get these angels, you get Abraham and Sarah, you get visits down to Egypt, you have visits, angels going down to Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, the angels, after visiting Abraham and Sarah, end up going down to Sodom and Gomorrah, where they're protected by Lot. You have all of these different moments and pieces of hospitality, of people crossing thresholds and wondering what greets them on the other side, or other people being in their house, in their place they're settled, and wondering who they are going to be welcoming in. And it is a powerful motif. It is something that is vital in Jewish life. We see it over and over again. We see it in all sorts of different places, in Elu Devarim, in different moments. And I share that with you because that's really, on some level, what this week has always felt like to me. Not that I've been traveling and then I've been leaving home and going places and not sure what I'm going to find, or I've been greeting people. We're still in the midst of this pandemic. There's not a lot of travel going on. But this week, with the election, it was not space, it was time. I didn't know when I went to bed what the day was leaving, and I had all of that stress and fear of what's going to happen during the night. And then I would wake up in the morning not sure what news I would find. Or when I did go out, would I find somebody that was moving with grace and sweetness and kindness, or would I find what I fear so much in our world, people that are angry and mean and stressed and cruel, and it's our side, it's us or them, and let's go get them. And I don't say that facetiously. It was actually corresponding with somebody who's working with the congregation on a Holocaust education project, and this person works for one of the political parties. And the person let me know that they had to close the party's political office in Indian River County multiple times because of threats of violence, including from prominent families in our county. And they actually had to call the police and close it down, and extra security. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're feeling. And I will also be free to admit it's actually been a fairly quiet week, and a lot of this has been my fear. Going out into the world, or waking up to the world and not sure what I'm going to face. And there's 2 images from my life where I remember that moment. I remember those moments of not being able to cross the threshold because I was gripped by fear. And I remember how excited I was that I couldn't get through that threshold fast enough. The first was at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. The absolutely amazing architecture at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. In that building, there is so much texture and shape. They do everything they can to unsettle you, to help you feel in your body the kinesthetic experience of what they're trying to share with you through story. In the lower level, when I was there when it first opened in the 90s. And when I was there, when it opened, they had, and they still might, an exhibit down in the lower levels called Daniel's Story, if my memory serves. And it was a story of a child experiencing the Holocaust. And all I can remember is they take you first through Daniel's life in whatever country it was. I think it might have been Germany or it might have been Amsterdam. I am not sure. And there he is, and they show his family and growing up, and then the Holocaust arrives, and you get to this place in the exhibit where you're in front of a gate, and it's a gate made to look like the entrance to Auschwitz with barbed wire and gate, and you're supposed to go through so you can then experience what Daniel did as he tried to survive in the camps. And I just remember that paralyzing fear of stopping. And other people were walking by me, and I just stopped because I knew what the story was on the other side. I was standing there saying, here I am, it's the 1990s. I'm in my teens or 20s. I'm an American Jew, and I can walk freely. I can just leave the museum. There's nothing dangerous on the other side of the gate, and yet something in my neshama, something in my soul and my spirit says you can't walk through that gate because that's death. So there I was, just standing there, not being able to cross the threshold with all of that negative emotion and fear and anger and frustration and uncertainty of what to do and how to respond to the situation and to the world. I've also had the opposite. I've also had a moment where I couldn't get through the door fast enough. And I probably say that, I can only imagine what the chat would blow up, because I'm sure you all have stories where you are thinking of, well, that's when I couldn't get through the door fast enough. I was thinking, as I thought about Daniel's story, said, if I'm going to tell that moment where I'm stuck and stopped and angry and fearful and not sure what to do, I also know, as much as there's the curse, that I need to offer blessing. And so I was thinking about it, and the image that came to me is actually returning from Israel. Coming back from my year in Israel, and Jill had the blessing or curse, you can talk to Jill, of going with me for that year in Israel. And it was an amazing year, and it was a tough year being away from home and studying in Hebrew and just the hard work of being in my first year of rabbinical school. And Jill came back a few weeks early. She came back to get ready for us to move to Cincinnati and look for a job and to see her family. And so she had left a few weeks early, and there I was coming home. I had been gone for an entire year. It's the longest I'd really been away from home, been away for Jill for a few different weeks. And I remember just after that whole experience, coming home and knowing that knowing that Jill and my mom, and here I am hesitating. Do I say my mom or do I say my wife? Which one did I want to greet more? That's probably another whole thing for the chat. I can only imagine. There I was, and it was my mom, and it was Jill, and how just excited I was to come home, to see Jill, to tell my parents, and to share with my family all of just the adventures that we had had over the course of that year. I just remember being ready to run up that jetway to be able to throw myself into their arms. Both of those moments and both of those experiences, and we've all been in those places. We have all been in those moments where we are either on one side of the door or the other, but we don't know, are we running into a place of blessing? Or are we welcoming somebody with joy? Or are we walking into a place of curse and xenophobia and anger and frustration and jealousy and yetzer hara? Or are we greeting someone, crossing paths with someone that is full of that dark side? That has been so much of my story in this week. Not sure of which one. And part of what I can offer to you, because I'm going to guess from conversations that I'm not the only one that's been experiencing both of those poles, both of those perspectives. On one hand, looking for grace and kindness, chen and chesed and rachamim, and on the other, filled with a lot of yetzer hara, a lot of anger and frustration and fear. And so I share with you on this Shabbat another little piece of that story of Lech Lecha and Vayera, because right in the middle is an amazing place. It's one of the places where I've actually visited some of the most in Israel. When Jill and I were there, we actually had an opportunity. They had just discovered what I'm going to tell you about in a minute, but we actually had an opportunity to do a dig at Tel Dan in northern Israel, very northern tip of Israel. From one part of Dan, you can actually look into Lebanon and shift your gaze and look into Syria as well. And then we've gone back in successive trips. And one of the trips, it was actually our 2014 trip, and Jill and I were there with the kids. I even know that I'm pretty sure it was December 25th, because it was either New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Actually, Melinda is here. Do you remember when we were at Tel Dan? I feel like it was Christmas Day, because we had just been talking with Jill's sister, and it was her birthday. And there we were at Tel Dan, and you have to realize at Tel Dan, they've discovered something that shouldn't exist. At Tel Dan, they were doing a dig, and it was by an archaeologist from my school, from Hebrew Union College. And they started doing digs, and they found this part of the wall that was like these mud bricks. And they started excavating very carefully around it, and they started tracing the bricks. And the archaeologist looked at it and said, do you all see what's there? And they said, no, what is it? And he said, it's an arch. And they said, it can't be an arch. We're talking about 3,000 years before the Romans, and the Romans invented the arch, so there can't be an arch. And sure enough, what did they find at Tel Dan but an arch in the wall into the city? An arch that shouldn't exist. That's the spot. But it's more of what happened in that spot, because I remember being there with the kids, and we were looking at it, and it was kind of into the end of the day, and our guide said very simply and very powerfully, you realize where you're standing. Now, Israel, everywhere where you stand is a place of significance, but he said, think about it for a moment. If you have Avram and Sarai, and they are in Haran, they're in Mesopotamia, in order to get to the land of Israel, to this land of Canaan, this place where you're spending these lovely weeks, you actually have to go north into Syria, come around into Lebanon, and then come south. And we think that instead of taking the coastal road, because that's going to be a little harder, they're going to come down the Syro-African Rift Valley, which is right where we were standing. And he said, north is the Phoenicians, this is the land, and Tel Dan is the beginning. This is the first settlement, village, city that Avram and Sarai would have come from. That spot, that gate, that arch was from the time of Avram and Sarai. He said these steps are where they would have stood as they walked into the first city, settlement, village, whatever it would have been considered at that time, to come in to the land of Israel. How awesome is that? I take both conversations, both of those experiences, that experience of walking through doorways or greeting people as they come through your thresholds, that experience of fear or blessing, of blessing and curse, of anxiety and jealousy and rage versus grace and patience and kindness, that experience that I have seen as I've been watching this election in our country all this week, and I want to pair it with what Avram and Sarai experienced as they stood in the steps on that place, because I'm sure that's exactly what they felt. And it repeats itself through Lech Lecha and Vayera again and again in each of the different moments. There are so many moments of welcoming. I pictured myself, what would Avram and Sarai felt as they stood on those steps saying, I wonder what waits us on the other side? Or I wonder what Abraham would have experienced as he was standing in his tent and looks up and 3 strangers are coming his way, and what news do they bring? we have set before us. I feel as we are in this week of elections and it is moving forward, and we will see what happens and where our country goes. But I keep finding myself over and over and over again standing at threshold and standing in that place, whether I am the one crossing over or I am greeting, and I am faced with that challenge and that question of what am I going to face and what am I going to present to the world. That's our challenge for this Shabbat. That is our challenge this week. And my first instinct, my first inclination was to tell you, stop the cursing. It's too easy for us to stand up and get angry and frustrated and look to be mad at the world because look what those people are doing. That honestly was my first instinct. But then I looked at what God said to Avram and Sarai, Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladecha mibeit avicha. As they were going forth from their land, from everything they knew, God gave a blessing. God said to them, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those that bless you. I will curse him that curses you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. My first inclination was to remember, oh, see, God says those people who curse, they're going to be cursed. See, look at the world. Those people who spread curses and evil, it's going to come back to bite them. That's what I would start where I started. But the more I looked at that blessing, 5 times, I will bless you, you shall be a blessing. I will bless those that bless you, and you shall bless themselves by you. It's one of 2 ways. One is God is heaping extra blessings because it's hard going into the world and we need God's extra blessings. Or I also thought it another way. As I remember these moments of crossing thresholds, the ones that make me afraid and anxious and upset and angry at the world, and those that seek to create blessing and kindness and grace and compassion. And maybe it's God giving me that, or it's God reminding us, as God reminded Avram and Sarai over and over and over, the world is tough. The world is a scary place. It is full of strife. This is what made Noah different from Adam, and then Abraham different from Noah, is that God gave these instructions, and Avram and Sarai, Abraham and Sarah, took them to heart. Maybe it is not that God heaped extra blessings upon them. Maybe as they are facing the world and dealing with the world and struggling and striving with the world, God is saying over and over again, when you're in that moment of Yetzer Hara, either going through the door or greeting those who come towards us, remember, it might be easy to curse, but bless, 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 bless. Let us, on this Shabbat, with our world crossing into this new time and new space and new era where there is much uncertainty, when we might be tempted to curse, let us always search for, find, work hard for, strive to bring bracha, blessing into our world. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.